In a new relationship between a boss and a supervisee, the boss will spend time defining the work the supervisee is being hired to perform. This is natural and expected. But how should a boss relate to a supervisee on an ongoing basis once the supervisee is operating in the new role? We can learn one powerful technique from the life and model of Jesus. Jesus famously taught about servant leadership, a widely referenced and perhaps nearly universally hailed ethical standard. This standard, first articulated by Jesus in the 10th chapter of Mark, is honored even in the widespread hypocrisy of political, religious, and business leaders who might publicly admire the notion while studiously avoiding its practice unless absolutely necessary because the cameras are running and people are paying attention. But successful organizations, whether militaries or businesses or clubs or governments or schools or churches, over the long run will pay attention to the notion of servant leadership and pay more than lip service to its practice for the sake of these organizations' worthy goals. In Mark 10, Jesus is teaching about his mission on earth, and then he receives requests from two sources, one who seems to understand what he is up to, and one source that clearly doesn't. Listen as I read for the repeated servant's question. I'm reading from Mark 10, verse 35. James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came forward to him and said to him, Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask you. And he said to them, What do you want me to do for you? And they said to him, Grant us to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left, in your glory. But Jesus said to them, You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with? They replied, We are able. Then Jesus said to them, The cup that I drink you will drink, and the baptism with which I am baptized you will be baptized. To sit at my right hand or my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared. Next, Jesus teaches about servanthood and greatness. But I won't comment on this paragraph in this video. See the other video linked below in the description. Reading from verse 46. They came to Jericho. As he and his disciples and a large crowd were leaving Jericho, Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus, a blind beggar, was sitting by the roadside. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout out and say, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. Many sternly ordered him to be quiet, but he said out even more loudly, Son of David, have mercy on me. Jesus stood still and said, Call him here. And they called the blind man, saying to him, Take heart, get up, he is calling you. So throwing off his cloak, he sprang up and came to Jesus. Then Jesus said to him, What do you want me to do for you? The blind man said to him, My teacher, let me see again. Jesus said to him, Go, your faith has made you well. Immediately he regained his sight and followed him on the way. James and John came to Jesus with a strange request. We want you to do for us whatever we ask of you. This reminds me of when I was small and I wanted to trick my mom into granting my request for a cookie or for the last piece of yesterday's cake. If I ask you for something, will you say yes? My mom would respond just the way Jesus did. What would you like? My mom was wise enough not to promise an affirmative response before the question was asked, and not surprisingly, so was Jesus. But he asked the servant's question, What would you like me to do for you? He could have been incensed at their crude power play. How dare you ask me in that way? Whatever it is, the answer is no. But Jesus doesn't take offense, and in fact follows their quite unreasonable, it turns out, request with another question, a way of helping them understand that they are out of their depth. In fact, he tells them they are so in verse 38, when Jesus displays his foresight and insight. He knows that they do not now know what they are asking. He also knows that the situation is so much deeper than they know. He knows them more deeply than they know themselves. They are not now able, but they will be, and knows the future they cannot understand. Foresight and insight are two critical components of leadership, and in this situation, they give Jesus the lead that shows him properly the leader. Briefly, he speaks about the cup, which is an Old Testament allusion to suffering, and of baptism, which is not a direct reference to water baptism, but it points to what water baptism is an enacted parable of, death and resurrection. Jesus' answer to the disciples is that the right and the left, when he is in his moment of glory, are reserved for two others. James and John are not ready to drink the cup or undergo baptism. They're not prepared to suffer and die. So two thieves will be on his right and his left when he comes into his glory. A very different picture than the one James and John have imagined. One day, Jesus says, they will be prepared for this, but not soon. I think Jesus is somewhat amused, but not impatient by James and John's request. But now we can compare and contrast the two requests of Jesus, James and John's and Bartimaeus's. As the Gospel of Mark often does, two stories are tied together by an almost complete set of contrasting details with a central thematic unity. In the two scenes in this passage, Jesus asks the servant question, What do you want me to do for you? Two requests of Jesus, one asking for glory, the other asking for mercy. Of course, one of the most surprising aspects of Jesus' lovely and powerful interaction with the blind beggar Bartimaeus is that Jesus asked Bartimaeus this question at all. When Jesus first notices Bartimaeus, it is because Bart has been calling out for him, asking for mercy. Jesus says, "Call him." And by the time Bart makes his way to get in front of Jesus, it would have been evident to Jesus and everyone else that Bartimaeus was blind, even if Jesus were not the Son of God. So it's astonishing that Jesus asks him, "What do you want me to do for you?" If we had been watching right there, we might have said, "Well, Jesus, isn't it obvious? Are you blind? He wants you to heal him." But Jesus doesn't make any assumptions, or at least he doesn't mind hearing what perhaps is a redundant request. "My teacher, let me see again." Bartimaeus isn't just viewing Jesus as a miracle working healer, but as a teacher, and Bartimaeus is ready to sign up to be a student. So here is the wisdom for bosses from this passage. The servant's question is a powerful question whether the person you're speaking to is reasonable or not. Jesus asks the question with the disciples, and it helps them to eventually think more deeply about their situation. He cannot grant the request, but his asking the question led to a chance to share his foresight and insight. And Jesus asking blind Bartimaeus the question honored him rather than simply assuming what Bart's request was and disempowering him by meeting his request before he is able even to express it. With everyone I have ever supervised, hundreds directly, thousands indirectly, a part of my job is clearing obstacles out of a supervisee's way. Assuming they do want to perform their job, and in ministry or technical contexts, that's a good assumption. When they are struggling to make progress, often there is a way I can use my resources, experience, time, ideas to help them lift the obstacle out of their path so that they can continue. But I cannot do this if I do not ask and hear from them the answer to the servant's question. My asking doesn't make them the boss of me any more than Jesus asking the disciples inverted the authority relationship between them. But it tells people that as much as I expect them to be making progress toward my or the company's goals, I know that they can from time to time get stuck. A boss's prime job is to help his supervisees remain unstuck, making progress, ideally with increasing competence and productivity. Hearing someone sincerely ask you the servant's question is very motivating, and it brings out the best motivated efforts in response. So we should get used to hearing ourselves ask the servant's question. Sometimes we may be unable to say yes to a request, but we can look for ways to honor the request and the person making it. And sometimes it will be tempting to think we know what people want before we ask them, but it never hurts to listen before we attempt to serve. Jesus is not shy about teaching about servanthood. At the heart of this passage between these two stories is his central teaching on the topic. But Jesus first models servanthood before he teaches about it. So if you are a supervisor leading other supervisors, or a teacher hoping to teach young disciples or your own children about servanthood, make sure they are not hearing it from you for the first time, wondering why you've never tried to show them what you're now trying to teach them. And one good way to start, or to continue, is by learning from Jesus or from your mom about asking the servant's question. Finally, you may relate to someone simply as a friend, not as their boss. One variant of the servant's question might be practical and relevant in your life, the servant intercessor's question. How would you like me to pray for you? Who in your life would benefit from hearing you ask them more frequently and sincerely this question? Don't forget to like and subscribe.